In the near future, technology in Moscow is advancing rapidly. Countless postal couriers have been replaced by advanced robots, and under the neon lights at night, the city is full of vitality. Far away in Paris, a new type of civilian passenger plane flies high overhead. The bright lights flickered for him, telling the prosperity of the city. However, in an instant, the plane lost all its energy, fell from the sky, and fell into endless darkness with the city. The whole world lost its light. Only Moscow, a city, still flickered with human lights. Outside the glass window, the drone that was originally running in an orderly manner suddenly came to a standstill. The shrill sound of alarms and the blinding flash of red warning lights pierce the air a disaster is approaching. No one knows what caused this sudden catastrophe. Even in the emergency news broadcasts, the voices of professional anchors inevitably tremble. Except for Moscow, all contact with the rest of the world has been lost. It is not a natural disaster, nor is it a nuclear strike. Even their own family members have lost contact. All telecommunications have been destroyed. The military immediately formed special teams to begin search and rescue operations in the areas plunged into darkness. Soldiers and war correspondents entered the quarantine zones shrouded in thick fog. They arrived at a town plunged into darkness where there was no sign of life. The soldiers installed light orbs in the shopping mall, bright enough to illuminate the rooms. However, what happened next shocked all the soldiers. The residents who had been shopping had collapsed to the ground, losing their lives without any warning, and the entire city was like this. A soldier was ordered to search a dark house, when suddenly a black figure lunged out, the weapons of the multinational soldiers, and the figure did not make contact with each other. When the main squad arrived, they saw the black figure leap out of the window, completely unfazed by the bullets fired by the soldiers, and escaped from their sight. The search and rescue operation ended in vain, and after an entire month, no effective information was obtained. The media reported extensively on the incident, and panic gradually began to spread among the people. The followers gathered together, each worshipping their own lives. The citizens took to the streets, venting their fear through violence and crime. The Radical Party launched protests, using demonstrations to call on the government to take action and go on strike. Various conflicts and riots turned all of Moscow into a chaotic mess, and he walked through the tunnels. Under the bridge where a homeless man sat, he said goodbye to his elderly mother suffering from dementia and passed by the street. The young man being chased for graffiti had to return to his unit, determined to fulfill what he called his duty, Kirov District. Base number 8. This is the last stronghold of surviving humanity. Yura and Oleg are close comrades who share the same dormitory. On this day, the base welcomed a new Superior Lieutenant Colonel Kaya, sent by the Intelligence Directorate. His arrival was not only to take charge of upcoming military operations, but also to bring the base an important piece of intelligence. There had been mysterious human deaths in the quarantine zone. The cause in all cases was endogenous neurotoxin poisoning. A4, this is a chemical substance produced by the human body. In other words, all the people who died were killed by themselves. At present, the top priority is for the scientists in Moscow to collect the necessary evidence in order to make an accurate determination of the nature of the incident. We must also calm the fears and anxieties of the people of Moscow. In addition, soldiers need to be sent in batches into the quarantine zone to establish forward bases, reclaim Russian territory, and recover our own resources in order to alleviate the current dire shortage of resources. However, this was not an easy task. None of the 5 reconnaissance regiments that penetrated into the Kirovsky region returned alive, and even the entire company of 70 tanks sent out on the first day, a powerful and luxurious lineup, all lost their negatives. No one knows exactly what dangers are hidden within the quarantine zone. This fear of the unknown lingers in everyone's mind at all times. That night, the government delivered urgently needed supplies to the base, and Oleg unexpectedly reunited with a familiar-faced military doctor, Alyosha, who had come with the troops. It should have been a joyful encounter. However, before the two could exchange more than a few words, a shrill alarm suddenly sounded throughout the base. The soldiers hurriedly put on their combat gear and rushed to the front lines of the base, preparing to face whatever was coming. Was it the monster that had caused all the reconnaissance squads to never return? Or was it the very culprit responsible for the creation of the quarantine zone? No one knew any detailed information. All they could learn through the radio was that there were multiple unknown enemies emitting heat signatures, moving toward the unit from 3 kilometers away at a speed of 20 kilometers per hour. Everyone held their breath in tense anticipation as the commander fired several bright flares into the sky. Suddenly, shadows attacked, the darkness descended. Countless firearms unleashed their firepower all at once, yet the shadows still broke through the defensive line. They were not aliens, nor were they monsters. They were ferocious brown bears. Perhaps they could no longer endure the years of bullying by the Russians. At last the brown bears stood up and launched their own rebellion. Of course, brown bears do not possess such intelligence, so it could only be attributed to some unknown cause that drove the bears into a frenzy. The lieutenant colonel found the base commander and told him that there might be someone who could give them the answer. After the world was plunged into darkness, only a very small number of people survived in the quarantine zone and managed to find the base to save themselves. They claimed to have gained superpowers after the incident. They couldn't bend spoons, couldn't move glass, couldn't shoot webs like Peter Parker, and they weren't like the Hulk who could transform into a raging giant. They are not superheroes, but they can receive data with their brains, just like a radio. This data cannot be deciphered, and no one knows why such a thing is happening. Among them, the strongest one is currently receiving treatment at a military hospital. The young man woke up with a start, only to find a boy his own age sitting in front of him. He introduced himself as Zhang Ya, sent by someone named Yide. At this point, he told Sasha that the coming of darkness was not just a natural disaster. Instead, it was done deliberately by someone. The first wave destroyed all electronic devices, causing planes to fall from the sky and plunging lights and the night into darkness. The second wave triggered the self-destruction of all living beings, causing their bodies to produce toxins that made humans die by their own hands. And the third wave targeted the survivors left in the quarantine zones. Suicide was used to attack all the humans in Moscow, a population of 160 million. With Moscow's current strength, there was simply no way to withstand such a massive onslaught. These people had no self-awareness. They were controlled like zombies, mere walking corpses. But they were even more dangerous than zombies because they still retained human knowledge. Only Yide could stop them, and the only one who could help Yide was Sasha. By using his own ability to receive signals, Sasha could help Yide find the mastermind controlling these humans. However, Sasha did not agree to Jengir's request. He shouted for help, but none of the soldiers who rushed over could detect Jengir's presence. Jengir told Sasha that he was not communicating with the boy through his physical body, but had entered Sasha's mind, so no one would be able to notice his existence. Soon, the soldiers finished assembling, and Yura and Oleg each went to different areas of Kirov to carry out observation and construction tasks. Della and the war correspondent were assigned to the same squad, which meant that Yura had to protect this non-combatant woman at all times during the investigation. They made their way through the dense, lifeless forest and arrived in the small town of Kirov. The soldiers entered the houses searching for possible clues, while others set up defensive and construction posts on the rooftops at high points to guard against the enemy. After an entire day, they found nothing. On one side, teammates smiled as they watched through the rearview mirror, observing the close interaction between Alyosha and Oleg, who had been sent for emergency aid. On the other side, the war correspondent Volya, who had been woken up by Yura that morning, was now having breakfast together with Yura. Listening to her teammates teasing Yura and telling her to change her pose, the newly alert Yura noticed something odd about Xiaoji. She called Volya over to review the earlier photos and unexpectedly discovered that the shop door, which should have been closed, had actually been pushed open from the inside. Yura immediately went with her teammates to the shop and under their cover began searching the premises. The shattered glass bottles on the floor and the toppled items among the shelves all revealed clear signs that someone had broken in here. At the signal from the squad captain, they set a trap using a grenade. Afterwards, they returned to their base and began to stake out the store. Their patience paid off after a long wait. They finally achieved results. The team members stormed into the store, searching for the prey that had triggered the trap, thinking they were about to make a breakthrough. However, when Yula arrived at the trap, she realized that this was no prey at all. It was neither a monster nor an enemy, but just an ordinary boy. Injured by the explosion of the modified grenade, the captains hurriedly brought the child back to their base for treatment. But unexpectedly, the child suddenly lashed out, grabbed the lieutenant's dagger, and stabbed him in the neck with a single blow. At the same time, a large group of humans began to surge toward the base, launching indiscriminate attacks with firearms. The overwhelming and intense firepower instantly engulfed the entire base. In order to protect themselves, the soldiers had no choice but to fight back against the crowd. However, faced with such a large crowd, the squad's combat strength was simply not enough to resist them, especially since the attackers even had heavy weapons like rocket launchers. The overwhelming masses surged toward the base like zombies, and it was only thanks to the powerful firepower of the rockets that they barely managed to withstand the first wave of the assault. This was exactly what the boy named Zhang Ya had referred to as the third wave. After the wild bear attack, Lieutenant Colonel Kaya immediately went to the Moscow Military District Hospital to look for Sasha. At that moment, Sasha was just stepping out of his hospital room when he encountered a mysterious man dressed in leather, his face concealed. This man was none other than the mysterious figure Zhang Ya had mentioned Idid. Idid revealed his true face in front of Sasha. He was not human, and this scene was witnessed by Lieutenant General Kaya, who had just arrived. Kaya immediately led his soldiers to surround Idid, but in the next moment, the soldiers all turned their guns on Kaya himself. In the eyes of everyone present, Aidid had naturally taken on the appearance of Lieutenant General Kaya, while in the soldiers' eyes, Kaya himself had become the strange man. Aidid approached Lieutenant General Kaya and proposed a collaboration to him. In a conference room, he slowly revealed the truth behind all these disasters. 200,000 years ago, the planet where Aidid lived faced a crisis of extinction. In order to find a habitable planet, they set their sights on Earth. This was a relatively young planet, and the sun still had a very long lifespan ahead. It was an extremely perfect choice, but at that time, the environment on Earth was not yet suitable for Aidid's people to live in. In order to transform the environment into one they preferred, Aidid's home planet sent out 2 pioneers who used the most advanced technology to traverse the universe and arrive on this planet ahead of time, while the remaining inhabitants traveled aboard a massive warship. By putting themselves into hibernation, they endured a slow journey of 200,000 years before finally arriving in this world. The purpose of these 2 pioneers was to create humanity and teach humans the most fundamental aspects of civilization, so that over this long period, humans would gradually transform the planet into a form suitable for their own habitation. When the immigrant warship finally arrived on Earth, they would then wipe out humanity to make room for the Wayide people to live. The pyramids, Atlantis, these extraordinary and incomprehensible structures were all the work of these pioneers. The humans they created were not much different from themselves, except that through genetic modification, humans were stripped of their superpowers and instead given the ability to reproduce, allowing them to survive in this world. And now, with the fleet from the home of the Aid about to arrive, humanity's mission has been fulfilled, so naturally they are to be disposed of just like an Office Word document. After losing its purpose, it is thrown into the recycle bin and permanently deleted. Everything was supposed to go this way, but a slight accident occurred in the plant. Saeed released radiation, cutting off all electricity on the entire planet. When humans began to secrete toxins that would kill themselves, an unexpected development occurred. A biosphere appeared in Moscow, along with 160 million survivors who were immune to the toxin. However, because these survivors were exposed to radiation, they ultimately became puppets of their companions. Aidid's companions planned to use these puppets to kill all the humans in Moscow, but Koshchei was moved by compassion. Looking at these lives he had created, as the god who brought them into existence, Yinde decided to let humanity survive, so that their lineage could continue to thrive in this world. As a result, he came into conflict with another pioneer. That's why he sought out Sasha and used Sasha's abilities to locate RA, ultimately killing the pioneer who disagreed with him. Lieutenant General Kaya had no choice. News of the 3rd wave of attacks reached Kaya, and the 2nd assault began. Signal flares from all directions lit up the sky. Out of the 7 squads, 3 had already been completely wiped out, and the remaining 4 were locked in desperate combat. Eula, together with the war correspondent and her teammates, tried to break through and join up with the other squads. However, large numbers of puppets kept attacking the squad, and we kept dying one after another in the hail of gunfire. In the end, only Eula and the reporter were left. They made their way into a sealed garage and found a vehicle they could use to escape. Meanwhile, the base commander also successfully met up with Aidid, but the situation was dire. 160 million armed forces had already invaded the interior of Moscow and the base, and all contact had been completely lost. At this point, the only way to stop them was to find and kill the human RA who was controlling these puppets. He could die in peace with Aidid's help. With her psychic abilities, Sasha successfully located the position of the RA. General Kaya and the base commander immediately mobilized their forces, forming an assault team to head to the tower where Oleg was located. They prepared for a life-and-death battle with the RA. The young man quietly found Aid and told him that although he had discovered the enemy's location, the enemy had also become aware of his presence. Aid reassured Sasha to stay safely at the base, assuring him that the soldiers would guarantee his safety. But just as the troops had barely set foot outside the base, they saw what looked like shooting stars streaking across the sky. Those were not shooting stars, but powerful missiles. Countless intercontinental missiles tore through the sky, lighting it up alongside the anti-aircraft weapons. Brilliant fireworks blossomed in the sky as they faced a barrage of Katyusha-style missile attacks. In the end, the base was unable to defend against everything, and flames shot up into the sky from within. Humanity's last war fortress was reduced to ruins amidst the explosions. In the outpost near Moscow, Lieutenant General Kaya pointed his gun at Aid inside the armoured vehicle. Aid had foreseen all of this long ago, but he simply didn't care whether it was the base or Sasha. It made no difference to him. In Aid's eyes, they were all pawns to be sacrificed. He had left Sasha at the base precisely so she would draw the RA's fire, creating favourable conditions for their current operation. If Sasha had come with him, then at this very moment the missile strike would have targeted the convoy leaving the base. Yura successfully brought the journalist to the post where Oleg was stationed. The fighting here had been just as brutal. Only Oleg, the female medic, and a wounded soldier had survived. They had run out of ammunition, but being alive was still more useful than being dead. Soon, the commander and Lieutenant General Kaya's troops arrived one after another. The commander told Oleg that they weren't there to take a few people away, but to head to the place of the final battle. There was nowhere left to go. The outpost had been reduced to ruins, and even Moscow had been breached by the puppet humans. Now, they were the last hope of all humanity. Only by fighting with their backs to the wall could they seize the final glimmer of survival. However, as soon as they reached Kirov's tower, their path was blocked by countless puppet humans. The soldiers' instincts did not allow the drivers who had already experienced attacks from the puppet humans to hesitate, but soon they paid the price for their hesitation and mercy. Only then did the remaining soldiers steel their resolve and drive straight over the puppet humans. They no longer had souls. They were nothing more than walking corpses, puppets without fear or hesitation. But in the end, their flesh and blood could not withstand the onslaught of armoured vehicles. This allowed the soldiers to break through the encirclement and head straight for the tall building. Machine guns and bullets mercilessly mowed down the puppet humans. Yura followed Ide straight to the rooftop, while the others stayed on the ground to hold off the assault of the puppet army. Wave after wave of fearless charges, one soldier after another fell in battle, and the bursts of blood between bullets and flesh stained the entire ground yellow. As their strength gradually waned, Oleg led Lieutenant General Kaya and 3 non-combatants, planning to head to the upper floors to evade pursuit. The commander personally stayed behind to confront the puppet humans in a fight to the death, while the military doctor and the journalists followed in Yura's footsteps, making their way toward the rooftop. Yura tried to attack RA, but was nearly thrown out of the attic by RA. Even Yide's successive attacks were effortlessly deflected by RA, and the two of them grappled with each other in the high-rise building. Meanwhile, a truck loaded with fuel barrels sped in from the street, launching a suicide charge towards the building. Despite all available firepower being concentrated on the truck, they still couldn't stop its explosive advance, and the truck crashed headlong into the armoured vehicle. An explosive wave erupted, and countless puppet-like humans surged into the building, trampling over the bodies of their fallen comrades. Yide narrowly gained the upper hand, thrusting his right hand into RA's chest and tearing out RA's core. Seeing this, Yula hurriedly planted a shock grenade in RA's chest, bringing an end to RA's life. At last, the war finally came to an end. Yide took control of the puppet humans, and then mercifully ended the miserable existence of these people who had become nothing more than walking corpses. The sight moved all the survivors deeply. This was how it was meant to be, exactly as Yide had planned. He didn't need billions of lives. He only needed a handful, like lab mice, to let them reproduce and thrive. Under his guidance, they would give rise to a new civilization. After all the war and slaughter, only these few lives remained. And he himself became the only source of life and the sole medic for these remaining humans. Alyosha was unwilling to accept such an ending. He clearly had the power to save billions of lives, yet he remained indifferent, and now was expected to become the very lifeblood of humanity. In his eyes, humans were nothing more than playthings, like bubbles or ants in an underwater anthill. Yura urged Alyosha to lay down his weapons. Their companions were about to arrive. If they killed Id, it would mean having to face the remaining over 1 million enemies, each as powerful as Id and RA, all alone. With their current strength, accomplishing such a feat was simply impossible. In the next second, Zhang Ya, who had always worked for Ide, suddenly lost control of her body. She unexpectedly picked up the dagger from the ground and stabbed it into Major General Taya's chest. Stunned and terrified, she looked at Ide in panic, helpless, and collapsed to the ground. Just as you were holding on and apologizing, Oleg, seeing the tragic death of the Major General could no longer suppress his anger. He wanted to fight Ide to the death, but was intercepted by Yura halfway, and the two started grappling with each other. Oleg did not want his life to be controlled by so-called gods. He wanted to avenge all the humans who had died. Even if it meant mutual destruction, he had no regrets. However, Yura wanted to protect Ide, believing that only by surviving could they find a way to resist. The two struggled fiercely, and in the end, Oleg gained the upper hand, but the female reporter did not want to see Yura get hurt. She picked up the pistol from the ground and shot Oleg, wounding him. Oleg rolled to the side and pointed his gun at Id, who stood before them, expressionless and coldly watching as they fought each other. But Id kept transforming into the image of Oleg's father, trying to manipulate Oleg. At this critical moment, Zhenya, who had been holding back all along, suddenly launched an attack. In the midst of the illusion, he lunged at the completely unguarded Ide, and together they fell from the tall building. Choosing mutual destruction, but things did not end there. Although they had killed 2 of the vanguards, after a journey of 200,000 years, the ID's warships finally arrived on this planet. This was the planet they planned to migrate to, the one they intended to have humans transform to make it suitable for their own habitation. The massive warships crushed the skyscrapers beneath them. Beside the already lifeless RA, its core began to emit a strange, flickering light. Oleg, still supporting the gravely injured Yula, approached the warship with its ramp lowered. They understood that this was the final battle. They might die on this warship, but it was a final step they had no choice but to take. Thick pipes transported countless streams of nutrient fluid, sustaining the millions of alien beings slumbering in hibernation within the ship. It was easy to imagine that only Ra and Yide had been awake until now. They alone had nearly destroyed the entire world. If these alien beings were to awaken, then there would be no chance of survival left for anyone. The oxygen supply had already started, and they no longer had enough time or weapons to kill each alien in their hibernation pods one by one. In a moment of desperation, Holier came up with a clever idea and sabotaged the nutrient supply pipes, causing the aliens who were about to awaken to die completely due to the loss of oxygen and transport. This discovery filled the three of them with joy, and they immediately began destroying the pipes on the surface. Countless alien beings died as a result, with the nutrient fluid overflowing from the ship's cabins and spilling onto the ground. Soon, they finally reached the last peroxide pipe. As long as they cut this pipe, they could wipe out all of the alien life forms. But what they didn't expect was that in this final formation, it was actually filled with the children of the Yide tribe. Their momentary hesitation caused them to miss the best chance to kill them, allowing these children to awaken. The children slowly gathered in front of the three of them, yet they showed no desire to attack at all. Perhaps it was because these humans shared similar DNA with them. They regarded them as family, just like themselves. This film, Coma, is set entirely in a base and was released in 2019. It was directed by Russian filmmaker Igor Baranov, whose Gogol trilogy has also received widespread acclaim. The film's greatest strength lies in its stunning visuals, missiles and fireworks streaking across the sky, meteors, giant beasts charging, and massive bears attacking. From massive alien spaceships to the nighttime scenery of Moscow, every setting conveys the overwhelming sense of an apocalyptic world. The Scion base makes bold assumptions about the future of the world and the origin of humanity. It rejects the Darwinian theory of evolution, proposing instead that humans were created as labor tools by a higher civilization with a similar form to ours, designed as immigrants of an advanced civilization. They possess technology that controls human life and death, treating humans as playthings in their hand. However, they did not anticipate that human development would surpass their original expectations, and in the end, humans would become terrifying butchers who slaughtered these alien beings. First, the story deeply explores the good and evil within human nature. You can see women who despise the identity of the foolish soldier, but are enamored with Oleg's wealth and luxury. You can see Yura, a devoted son from a poor family who is also a soldier. And you can see Oleg and his comrade who, despite being close friends, end up fighting each other fiercely because of their differing beliefs when facing the final confrontation. Humans may vent their inner fears through committing crimes, or pray to the gods in hopes of receiving mercy for their mission. When confronted with alien life, they may resolutely cut off the oxygen supply, yet when facing the child of an enemy, they may show compassion. At the end of the film, Alyosha, Oleg, and the others spare the young alien creature. Although this sudden display of maternal instinct became a controversial topic, it also fit perfectly with the film's plot twist. ID sees humans as playthings, while considering himself the god who created humanity. However, the playthings he looked down upon ended up destroying his own people. In a twist, CCTV becomes the god of the alien children, leaving the film with a wealth of imaginative possibilities. Perhaps they will take advantage of the children's innocence to quickly learn advanced technology. As their civilization continues to evolve, perhaps they will teach the children about love, leading to joyful and peaceful coexistence. Or maybe, among the children, someone will harbour hatred because their parents were killed, and the seed of vengeance will eventually lead to retaliation. Among the many films directed by the director, there have been experiences with shooting sequels. Perhaps this kind of ending was also designed by the director as a foreshadowing for a sequel. However, judging by the global box office revenue of less than $3 million, it's very likely that the sequel will never materialize due to insufficient returns. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and give a like.